Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to part one of a four-parter on Tottenham and Omaha here at TonyBet. So I did a series on TonyBet previously. It's a good 6 months or so since I did it, so it seems like a good time to have a little bit of a refresher. In terms of what I've seen so far, just sitting down for a few minutes before recording this video, the games still seem very soft. You seem to get a very high number of players per flop. I don't seem to see many folds to 3-bets. Indeed, quite a few of them seem to get overcalled, which is interesting. And yeah, it seems to be pretty much as I left it. So you see the table on the left-hand side is somewhat smaller stakes than the table on the right. The traffic is slowly picking up, but I've basically jumped on what is available. So the table on the left should theoretically be a little softer. We are going to be playing a little differently as well, with it being four-handed. But yeah, let's just jump in, see what spots we can find, and hopefully talk through them in real time. And yeah, hopefully should be some good and interesting spots. And here's hoping for a profitable session. So you can see on the left-hand table, I have sat down for a few minutes and built a very small addition to the stack while I was waiting to get seated on the higher stake table. In general, I don't really like raising off the blind. It achieves comparatively little in terms of we're always getting called, and playing the entire hand out of position in a bloated spot is something I'm not enormously enamored with. As it is, the board's pretty awful. I can have some small pairs here to put in a check back, so in the check range, and then defend with. But obviously combos such as this we can just fold. So. But hands that I would consider check calling, pretty much 8s plus there, would be entirely reasonable. Indeed 7s could very plausibly just call one street and then evaluate river. Can I just overcall this in a four-handed game? Certainly not a 3-bet. The player is somewhat short-stacked, which leads to a slightly different SPR situation on the flop, but it still seems strong enough when double suited. Single suited, almost certainly I'm going to be folding it, but double suited, I've talked myself into a call. Especially when our opponent min raises rather than making it a full pot as well, which is also something that, generally speaking, is going to indicate a little bit of a weaker player. It's a flop that should favour my range more than his. Certainly can be a candidate for a check raise if I choose it. When we pick up the flush draw to go with it, albeit somewhat of a weak one, we are going to be betting here against his cap range and betting most rivers. It's actually close. I could check and bluff catch, given that I've made 2 pair. Still think we can get caught by worse, so we are going to go for some value. Gets folded anyway. But we're trying to target like ace X that's made just top pair on the river. Potentially a weak 2 pair that played somewhat passively on flop as possible. On the right hand table, very little sort of happened. We got limped into, flopped comparatively little. We are going to be defending here when in position. That's the flop. He checks to us, and we're just going to start building the pot. The fact I have 2 10s does greatly reduce the number of gut shot draws he can have to go along with whatever pair he has. Aces are folding, but hands such as king queen are forced to call one. Obviously sets and 2 pairs are going to call. He doesn't have many gut shots with the 10, but he certainly can have a good chunk with the queen. Unbeknownst to him, I do have that reasonably well covered, but he is still obliged to call at least one street. Sadly, we get no value. Bare aces are not going to enjoy the sight of that flop, so that would be a totally reasonable hand for him to have check folded in that spot, if he perceives me to be somewhat of an honest player. Players sat back in on the left-hand table. Hopefully this will stay four-handed for the purpose of the video. Indeed, if some other people sit down, it would also be kind of handy. Left-hand table, we get a hand that we could raise on the button if it was folded around to us. It's also perfectly fine to fold. Either option's fine. As it is, just going to throw it away when it's raised in front. It's going to be a hand that plays far better when we have the impetus rather than when we are facing a raise in front. Ace-Jack 6-4, I'd much prefer if the hearts were suited to the jack. Seems like somewhat of a passive table, so I think we can probably raise and pick this up, or at least raise and get this heads up. Somewhat loose, but probably reasonable. My plan of getting it heads up has worked. It's a question of what I do on this flop. And on a flop like this, I'm really not going to have to size particularly large. In general, sizing sort of around third to half pot on paired boards is going to be a reasonably good strategy. I do have a decent number of tens in my range. It does also hit his range to a point. Check folding is also fine. I'm going to evaluate what he does. Turn gives me a weak flush draw and a gut shot. It is going to connect with his range fairly well though. Given our opponent's small stack on the left-hand table, we're just going to be check raising, getting this in. And we're going to block a bet on the right-hand table if we get raised. Very, very content with letting it go. Sometimes we're going to get value off 10x, but it's essentially a blocker bet to prevent me from checking and facing a much larger bet and a much more awkward decision. And it also works in as a value bet on occasions as well. But it's kind of like a multi-purpose one that's preventing me from facing a horrendous decision. But a fairly nice run out on that one. And I think our sizing on the flop has kept some of the weaker parts of range in, which it will do. But as I said, sizing up on paired boards in general isn't going to be needed. And on turns that are somewhat bricky, we can certainly two-barrel on occasions as a mixed strategy and punish those weaker parts of range for calling flop. But the queen's just going to connect with his calling range too well. So totally content with just shutting down. As it is though, he let us see a river and we happen to get there. Hoping on the left-hand table for the short stack to top up to some degree. Leads to really unusual and somewhat awkward SPR spots. If you've got 20 big blind or less stack, just with the nature of pot limit Omaha, yeah, it's going to make things a little unwieldy, especially if he's calling rather than 3-betting and trying to get a stack in. I said there are a few people in the lobby who seem to be sitting down on tables and don't seem to be able to get games starting, so hopefully one of those decides to jump in this game if our short stack friend does depart. And someone has sat down, so that's pretty good news. It seems like the table, fingers crossed, is unlikely to break if another full stack is sat down. Forward's a very reasonable fold. Trash hand, not much more needs to be said about that one. The fact the small stack on the left-hand table hasn't got a plan as to what he was doing on the turn basically means that he, if he doesn't know what he's going to do on certain turns and rivers, it's one, indicating he's a very weak player, and two, just indicating sort of a lack of forethought when it comes to just basically playing a hand and understanding ranges and understanding what he's trying to accomplish with that hand. There's something to be said for just 3-bet and getting this in, just because I'm going to like check folding if I miss flop. If I call and then miss flop is kind of disastrous in terms of equity. So if I double him up, so be it. But check folding is pretty horrendous every time I miss. So let's see what he has. He actually has a pretty good hand, which kind of sucks. Sure. Win the somewhat of a flip, so happy enough with that. We appear to have a limp and a min raise on the right hand table, which one is really quite unusual. And secondly, what indicates King Kong is one, not very good, and two, that the games are superbly soft if this kind of stuff is going on. The limp under the gun is very weak. The min raise is, especially given his stack size and his SPR, just off the charts. We're just going to peel. His hand plays reasonably well multi-way. I don't really want to 3-bet and face a 4-bet. Gonna start off with a check my turn. Hand is likely good. I'm almost certainly gonna have to stack off the short stack with this hand. Facing other people, getting 100 big blinds plus in with merely a 10 is going to be very much a losing play. We're going to start off with a just call with my trips top kicker, turning a flush draw. King Kong can sometimes have aces. It can sometimes have ace 10. If that happens, that happens. His sizing is very, very strange and frankly could indicate aces. We're just going to be calling down. We actually make a straight as it is. I honestly have no idea why he would just muck there, but I guess he was betting ace X, I guess, but sometimes people do things which leads you to scratch your head somewhat, so I guess that's one of those instances. It's not a way that I would play a hand. You also have the weird scenario where he's actually got more money in a 10 euro table than he does on a 50, but hopefully he rebuys. Gonna bet my open ender here. We do have a lot of kings and queens in our range. If we pick it up, it's absolutely fine, and we can contest reasonably well. Yeah, even on like 10s and don't complete our straight, we have 2 jack blockers, so we're basically going to bet it as if we have the nuts. So we're going to be using any ace, jack, 10, or 9. The jack, of course, making us a straight. We have a 10 blocker to the ace 10 straight. Right hand table, top pair, backdoor flush draw of somewhat of weak variety and not much else. I'm going to try and taste a showdown. I don't anticipate my hand to be good very often, but given the price I was offered pre-flop, definitely going to be a call. It's not the strongest hand in the world, but I am getting 5.5 to 1, so again, close my eyes, try and hit gin. That hasn't happened, but given the price, totally reasonable. King Kong seems to be going for like a very small bet strategy and then pots. I'm going to imagine a strategy like that is horribly unbalanced. My King Jack is not going to be strong enough to contest that. Pocket 7s. If this was somewhat more of a connected hand, we could raise it on the button. As it is, it's not quite good enough. The under the gun raise makes it a moot point anyway, but something important to think about what we would do if it was folded around to us. 10s is certainly not a 3-bet. We could call it folds tight, although I think Gerkris is one of the better players here. I'm going to call it though. That's a Murph flop. Gerkris is going to have some overpairs. He's also going to check this flop a good chunk of the time just because it's not going to connect with his range. The times he does bet, he's probably going to be on the stronger side. Overpairs with flush draw, combo wraps, very occasionally a 5. I would say he doesn't have a huge number of 5s, though. It's more the big draws and the overpairs with flush draws. We have a new player sitting down as well. Flopping a jack with an ace kicker on a board that shouldn't connect with our opponents too often. Again, going to go for a moderate size. If King Kong decides to shove like that, I'm not thrilled by it, but I probably have to call off. Very occasionally he's going to shove with like jack 6 maybe. Sets, I guess, but like how he has a set of jacks and a set of deuces, I don't know, but this guy seems to be doing a lot of stuff. I don't really know why he would do it. Aces? What the? Okay, I guess that also is a thing. Fair enough, you win, sir. Why on that stack size he's not 3-betting aces is a question only he can answer, but yeah, okay. Still feel my call against his range is going to be reasonably profitable. It's not a fist bump, get it in spot, but it is a spot. And going to be making more money long term than losing versus that kind of stack size. If I'm intending to bet fold top pair to effectively a pot size ship, then I shouldn't be betting top pair at all. Trips, always a good starting hand. Following the junkie hand on the round table. So you can make notes on TonyBet. I don't think you can color code people though, as you can on previous sites. I would be tagging this guy. My default fish color on the other sites. I don't have that option though. And of course the site has no HUDs as well. So any reads you have, making notes is going to be a good idea to tag regulars and effectively just give you a good idea of what people are capable of, what their general game plan happens to be. Apparently I must have played this guy 6 months or so ago because I have a note on him. Left hand table, give me folding threes, pretty standard. So yeah, King Kong seems to be getting in a lot of pots. He's obviously up slightly having had the aces. Although I don't know what he bought in for. But would call it a 3-bet out position on the left-hand table, which is not something I would ever advise someone doing, but seems to be perhaps not a default strategy here, but something that is not hugely uncommon. Again, given the stack size, this call is incredibly weird. He basically has the perfect stack size to jam, and if he's willing to call, he probably should be jamming, truthfully. I have no idea how that just got checked round. Oh, the Jack 5, of course. We're going to defend the kings. I would say typically that this wouldn't actually connect with a raiser's range in the cutoff, but given it's King Kong, that statement is possibly not accurate. I do have a 4 blocker to the straight. I do have a reasonably strong flush draw. I'm not convinced of the value of raising this guy. I think we're just going to peel. It's a pretty good turn. I'm losing to exclusively 6-4, which I block. I'm going to very much go off sizing as to what to do versus this gentleman now. If he bets something, basically anything less than pot, I'm probably raising here. And looking to try and get value off weak 2 pairs, etc. That is somewhat of a bad card. That being said, given the way this hand's played, I'm going to have more 6s than my opponent, so I'm going to go for a blocker bet again. Very occasionally I get caught by worse. But I'm mainly blocking. Oh, look, ace deuce, yeah, of course. The guy who plays every hand always has aces. It's a good strategy. A little bit of an unfortunate result there. Oh well. I would have been blocking with diamonds as well. If I hit the diamond flush, I'd probably size it up slightly, but I would be leading out and folding to a raise. I don't anticipate that he's going to have too many ace blocker bluffs there if he had hit his diamonds. So again, if he hit his diamond, he'd have made a little bit more, like a euro or so extra off me, but nothing too major. Just an unfortunate 4 coming off, especially when I had one of them in my hand. Junky disconnected hand on the button. Just going to be letting that one go. So yeah, overall impressions on the 50 table is it's probably the softest 50 table I played in a good little while. Um, Maybe there's an adjustment that I need to make versus the standard of play. That's certainly possible. Um, I would have never expected a short stack to have smoothed aces pre in the big blind versus an open and a call. So I don't really know too much about the other guys. They don't seem to be doing stuff that's wildly out of line. But King Kong is going to be making this a reasonably juicy table long term. Obviously, short term in half an hour video, it's quite possible to end up on the wrong end of it. But as long as the spot's good long term, we're going to be reasonably happy about it. With a good connected Broadway double suited hand on the button, we're going to be 3-betting and trying to get this heads up. Whether I manage that in this kind of format remains to be seen, but that is the dream. Okay, I wasn't expecting that, but sure. We have some people trying to play every hand, and we have some people folding to 3-bets. I mean, for the record, out of position, there is certainly a part of his range that he should be folding. I'm a little surprised that he did fold truthfully, because I would say at 50 and below, people generally don't fold to 3-bets. Whether mathematically they should or not. But yeah, I mean, if he was at the bottom part of his range, it's probably a reasonable fold if he puts me on a tight 3-betting range, which he doesn't know anything about me, so that's not an unreasonable assumption. I think with time it's an assumption he would probably grow to realize is not accurate, but there we are. But yeah, the ace queen jack 5 double suited, perfect candidate to 3-bet on that button. Yeah. And yeah, we would only really face a decision if we happen to get 4-bet, and really that's a pretty disgusting spot, and one that we certainly would be folding our single suit variants. Double suited with an ace, it's close, but you certainly can fold it. Just because the SPR is not in your favor and your opponent's going to be very, very ace dominant. Or aces dominant, sorry. But double suited, I can understand when people call. So on TonyBet, these two guys have just run it twice. You also have the option of running it 3 times if you want to, if they wanted blood in that particular instance. But 2 times, it was very, very likely to end up chopped. Get limped on. Let's take a flop dealer. Possibly have a redo and take a different flop if that's possible. Bottom pair and a gut shot. I mean, it's a thing, but it's not a great thing. Opponent pots. Opponent did overcall a 3-bet with Jack 10 5 deuce double suited, so I'm going to imagine his pot size range is going to be pretty heavily nutted and not especially balanced. Again, with time, that could be an assumption I could be dissuaded of, but as a default, I think it's pretty accurate. Moderate strength ace in the small blind when I'm not completing, and I'm going to be out of position to anyone else in the hand. Doesn't seem like a particularly attractive option. And 3-betting it just seems suicidal, and would be suicidal. Ready goes for the pot size again, in a spot where his 3-betting range should literally never hit that board. Gets jammed on, and of course goes for the call. Why wouldn't you leave the guy 90 cents behind? And then folds. Well, I'm not sure if that's not chip dumping, technically. That is, well, they say online poker's dead, but I guess when you see things like that, it does make you wonder. But certainly the games here seem to be very soft. If stuff like, I mean, obviously I've only played, roughly half an hour and a few minutes setting this up, but if stuff like that is happening long term, then that can never be a bad thing if you jump in one of those games. Whether it's commonplace or not, obviously over the course of this video series, we'll see, but I haven't seen something like that on a, I guess, quote unquote, big site in, oh God, over a year at least. possibly longer, in fact. One thing to note is he's playing on a phone. You know, general default is people playing on phones or tablets are usually on the softer side, with a few notable exceptions. Whether that's accurate on this side, again, time will tell. Opponent on a phone limping under the gun may possibly help my hypothesis. Although he doesn't seem to have done anything too out of line, so that could be quite unfair on his part. But certainly limping under the gun is never going to be a particularly efficient strategy. The min bet. That's an interesting card. A couple of straight flushes possible. Not that I think either opponent would have it, but... Eights, I'm going to fold out position, would be defending big blind. Double suit fours are going to peel. Flopping the 7-4 straight. Two backdoor flush draws. It really depends what King Kong does. Like, if he sizes this, it's actually reasonably tempting to go for the check raise. It's probably something I'm doing, actually. And we get it through. Sometimes normal strategy appears to work. Yeah, that's partly based on timing tells. Sizing tells. Having just seen this guy play for half an hour, and it's also due to the fact that typically that board is going to hit a calling range more than a raising range. Granted, he is on the button, but even so, middling cards tend to hit the caller more than they do the raiser in pot limit Omaha, which is why it's important to mix a few draws into your raising ranges from early position, just for board coverage, and obviously the later position you happen to be in, the more sort of rundowns and wraps you can have. But as like a general default, there's certainly going to be some instances where you can, with reasonable confidence, say that you can have nut parts of range and your opponent can't. It's going to be 3-betting. They are single suited, they're not hugely connected, but blind versus blind in position seems pretty reasonable. It's an okay flop. Again, the problem is the 7 and the 5 hit him. I do have the ace blocker to the hearts though. Bet fold seems reasonable on flop. Checking is also okay. Do have the 7 blocker to one of the pairs. Just picking it up is absolutely fine. As I said, there's absolutely nothing stopping me from having queen X with nuts hearts, aces with nut hearts. Indeed, I can 3-bet some rundowns and have like the 6-8 with some heart combos. 3 queens is also very possibly in my range. So it's not like he can just put me on aces or like broadways that totally missed every time. Far from it. I'm going to have enough part of range that is, if not completely nutted, at least scary enough to mean that he has to play somewhat honestly. Betting an 8, having a gut shot, blocking some of the combo draws, size down a little bit. It is feasible he has better 8s, but we'll cross that bridge if we ever come to it. As it is, we're just going to bet for value until I'm told otherwise. Depends how many backdoor diamonds I think he has. Part of me wants to bet because I'm going to get value off 7x, although calling 2 streets with 7x would be kind of weird to begin with. Part of me thinks that he's only ever calling diamonds, and there's enough parts of range in the form of 10-9, although I block it, 9-6, 5-6, that's all missed, and occasionally has a better 8. I'll talk my inner net into checking. Question on that run out whether he's ever calling on the river. Suspect not. The run out doesn't contain a diamond on the river, I'm for sure value betting, but maybe that's a nitty check. Quite possibly is. It's partly because I don't think I can get value off much when the diamond comes off. So I'm not checking necessarily because I think I'm beaten, although I mean that could theoretically happen. It's more that I don't think I'm getting called by much that I actually beat at that point when the diamond comes off. With the player being King Kong in question, maybe that's something I would have to reconsider, and depends how thin I want to go. Ace-8 for sure is going to be a value bet. King-8 is going to be a value bet. 10-8 is in a bit more of an uncertain zone. Anyway, it seems to be an interesting hand to leave it on. So feel free to post your questions in the comments. There's going to be 3 more parts of this video, so hopefully some more interesting spots coming in those. But until then, I've been Tom for PokerVIP.com.